The spirit field research is based on a series of discoveries, the first of which is the reliability and the use of a pendulum. As long as I use it in a restricted way, where we are only monitoring allergic reactions of my wife or my pets, or finding out what the body does or doesn't want. We were able to detect 118 elements off the periodic table. I found it very reliable for testing the strength of an ion spray coming out the ends of batteries. I use it for testing the ion flow, energy flow going through the DC power lines in my cars and trucks. It has worked really well for that. We do not use it for contacting the dead or trying to predict the future, although I wish it would work for predicting the Kentucky Derby winners or what stocks are going to be coming in really good, but we don't use it for that. I also wish that it wouldn't be so affected by molybdenum. If we get too much molybdenum in our diet, the pendulum will not work. I don't know why it messes it up, but it is dependent on that. But we found that it does, when it's working, it works. It's reliable. And so that was the first thing that we discovered. The second thing was when I was doing a research study of orgonite, I discovered that there were a lot of energies that were flowing through these devices, as particularly referring to the cones and pyramids. And this is actually a cement cone here made in a funnel, just to illustrate what I'm talking about. The resins that orgonite is made of act as a crystal or a jewel. An EMF gets into it, and positive ions will spray out of here from the EMF. Negative ions will spray out of here from the EMF. But when I was researching the orgonite, I observed another field that actually draws ions, negatively charged ions, into the base. Horizontal to the base, it draws them in. It's a collector field, and you can call it a band or a ribbon of ions come out, but it's not flat like a ribbon. It's more like a hose that goes through a tube. Just literally, it's contained a flow of anions, negatively charged ions, going off toward a target. And what I discovered by researching this was that in nature, every life on Earth is based on carbon. Carbon is the building block for all life on Earth. And there is in nature fields that form around carbon-based objects in order to help them in their life on Earth. There are two fields in particular. The first field is called a Morphic Field, so named by Rupert Sheldrake, and I'm going to be referring a lot to his lectures and to his books, because he's more of a scientific research, standard research sort of individual. So when people don't like the way I research with a pendulum or something like that, I will refer them to Rupert Sheldrake and his research, because that's more of a standard scientific approach. But he coined the term morphic field because it's a field that forms around carbon-based objects of similar composition, and it forms around them to make them act as one. It morphs them into a single unit. That's the morphic field. And the second field is what I was observing off the semonite and off the cement when I was working with that, is this tracking field. And this particular tracking field, the tracking field, first thing it will go for is a positive ion charge. And what this relates to is if you damage a leg, let's say you're walking and you fall down and damage your knee or your leg, the body will put out at that point of injury a positive ion charge. And if there's any rocks around a carbon base or a tree stump or anything, the anions, negative charge of the earth, will actually come in a beam, almost like a tentacle coming out of the stump into that positive ion charge in your leg to try to bring about, to initiate some healing process for it. So it helps to restore the healing But if there's any predatory animals around, let's say if this is the nose of a predatory animal like a dog or a wolf, coyote or something like that, and he's out sniffing for something, off of his nose will go a tracking field with whatever he's going for. And if you damage your leg, it puts out a positive ion signal, and if he's close enough, it will actually pull his tracking field toward the wound in your leg, and he will come over to see what in the world was damaged, to see if it was an easy meal. This works a lot with fish. A lot of fish are attracted to this, the positive ion charge, because of the tracking field. When people go chumming for like sharks or something, they smack and mutilate the meat. And by cutting and pounding the meat, it will put out a positive ion charge, which helps to attract predatory animals into them. Some fishing vessels will actually attach cathodes, or a string of cathodes. They'll drag them behind their fishing vessels, because a lot of the fish will come swimming in to see what damaged animal is in the water that they can eat, and they'll get caught in the nets or in the hooks if they're using that method. The next thing that the tracking field is attached to is a drive or a need. If an animal is deficient in an element or a mineral, the tracking field will naturally look and seek out that mineral. And if the animal is capable of following his tracking field, it will guide him to a source for that mineral. This is particularly, you'll see this in like long-range travel for like flocks of birds. Because a flock of birds, a morphic field will form around them, and one singular tracking field will come off to represent the need of the entire flock. It'll act as a unit, and if they get hungry, the tracking field will find the food that they're after and will guide the entire flock down to a source of that food. Or if they get tired, it will guide them down to a resting area. The tracking field will then go for a need. The tracking field will also go for a similar composition, similar genetics, similar DNA. Let's say you find a piece of cement, some cement chunks on the side of the road that are broken loose. You pick one of those up, a tracking field will go from the piece of cement that you picked up down to the other pieces of cement, because they're of a similar composition. Because this natural tracking field doesn't know whether the organic object is alive or dead. It just knows that there's enough carbon in there to initiate this. You think of identical twins, even those who have been separated from birth, the tracking field will run between them. And the tracking field will not only carry anions, but it will also carry the thoughts and impulses of the individuals through that field. And they will find that after many, many years that these separated from birth identical twins are thinking the same and dressing the same and acting the same, because their thoughts are literally being transmitted through that tracking field. The tracking field will work for people who are bonded, if emotional bonding. Oftentimes there'd be situations where a mother will drop her child off at child care and go to an office job or something else. The child will get hungry and start to cry at child care, and the mother, being even in an office somewhere, her milk will start to let down, because there is a tracking field between her and that child because of the bond. There are a lot of situations where dogs and cats are bonded to their masters or their families, and will be able to track not just the location of where their masters are, but also the thoughts and intents of those. And referring to a book here from Rupert Sheldrake, Dogs That Know When Their Owners Are Coming Home, it was when the owners decided it was time to come home, that the dogs would come and sit by the door. They could actually, through the tracking field, know that the master had decided to come home. The focus and attention. If you focus on something, even something that you're looking at, a tracking field will come off your face. You're not as pointy as an animal, but still on humans, a tracking field will come off the face and go to the object that you're focusing on. And so too, a book by Rupert Sheldrake about knowing that you're being stared at, that phenomenon. There's also other research that he's done on the extended mind, where it's not ESP, it's actually the tracking field, where you may know the phone rings and you have a pretty good hunch who it is calling. You just have this feeling. And it's not ESP, it's actually the tracking field, that somebody was thinking about you, their tracking field went to you, and you actually started getting the sense of that person before the phone even rang. So we have the morphic field, which takes a group of carbon-based objects of similar composition that are close but not touching, and it forms them into a unit where they share similar thoughts and impulses. And then we have the tracking field, where, like, let's take a group of starlings. If they get separated, these groups of starling will then have a morphic field around this group, a morphic field around that group, and a tracking field that will bind the two groups together so they can know the impulses and instincts of the other group. The tracking field carries thoughts and impulses, but it can also find things that the normal mind that we cannot find with normal standard science equipment. Particularly, one day I saw a photo which was on the internet for a very short time and was pulled down, but this is basically a depiction of what the photo was like. It shows a table. This is an outdoors, and there was a resin pyramid on the table, and I think this was taken with Carillion photography or some other energy camera. There's a tracking field that went off of it and disappeared off the picture, and it came back down onto the picture. There was an orb right there. Now, after working with the tracking fields, I knew that this tracking field had gone quite a distance up this way and had hit the orb. The orb came down, and it took a while. It was taking a while for the tracking field to retract itself, to reel itself back in. It's the nature of what it is. But anyhow, here was this orb. And I thought to myself, well, if this thing can find orbs, and I don't know what an orb is, I've got this device, and this works out really well for putting on a tracking field. So I set it on the floor in my kitchen, and I said, please find me a tracking field. And I checked with the pendulum, and please find me an orb. And I checked the tracking field, and it was going right out the ceiling. And I was standing there suddenly feeling really stupid. I hadn't thought this thing through. It's like, well, apparently it's hit something. It found something. But what do I do now? And so I thought, well, according to this photo, the orb came down. And so I don't know anything about this orb thing, but I do know a tracking field. And so I thought, well, maybe this orb is somewhere in the house, close by, close by my little cone here. And so I was going around the area trying to find the end of the tracking field. And I'm glad no one was in the house, because I felt really stupid going around there searching, trying to find the end of the tracking field. Couldn't find it. And then I thought, well, what am I supposed to do? Maybe I should ask it to come into my hand. Or first I asked it to place it in my hand. Nothing. Checking the air. Please place this thing into my hand. And then I thought, well, what if I just say, please come into my hand? And the next thing I knew, I caught the end of the tracking field. And it was stopping 11 inches away from my hand. I thought, goodness. I've got a tracking field up here. It's stopping 11 inches away from my hand. Therefore, there's something that's 11 inches big in my hand. And I thought, this must be that orb that I saw in the picture. And so I started working, trying to study and research what this orb is. And it was funny because, if I moved my hand at all, the thing would start to float away, and I'd have to try to find the tracking field again, and it would just start to float away. I said, please come back to my hand. And it would come back into my hand. And I worked with it as much as I could. And the next day I did the same thing. I said, please come back into my hand. And it did. And I thought, well, it didn't take it long this time. I found out that the thing, it wasn't going back up in wherever it was, way up there. It was actually going 4 inches behind my shoulder blades. And my wife, I said, let's try something here. And I had her give the same command to the cone, and it fired off, and it brought her a orb, just like the one that I had. And it, too, went right behind her shoulder blades, and it would stay there. Now, she hasn't really ever done much with it. I did as much research with it as I could, and I did find that if I hold my hand like this, the orb will come from behind my shoulder blades into my hand, which is nice. I mean, because I don't have to ask it anymore. I just hold my hand like this. And if I say yes, 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 a strong, well, I shouldn't say a strong, a cation charge, a positive ion charge will develop inside the orb. Also, it will stimulate the lightest elements of particularly helium and hydrogen. So if I'm going for a hydrogen reading in the atmosphere, let's see what I can get here. There's hydrogen. Just about a neutral reading, but I'm going to now say yes, 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 and we're going to go for a hydrogen reading. And what happens is the orb will stimulate the hydrogen in the atmosphere. So I found out now that the easiest thing for me to detect the orb with is actually to say yes, 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 or bless you, and then check the hydrogen that's inside of it to see if it's been stimulated. And that's how I get confirmation that the orb is actually there. So the first important fact about the orb is that it likes to rest 4 inches behind the shoulder blades. This will come into play later on. The second thing is that the energy within the orb is stimulated by positive yes, yes, yes. And I didn't know what to do with it or how to experiment with it. I did realize that if I push it toward a glass of water, it would actually reduce down into a wisp. I did not like to go into water. But if I put it in my hand, like held it here, I could actually breathe it into my lungs, and it would form into a wisp and go down into my lungs. First time I did that, it burned really bad, and I coughed it back up. And I thought, well, I don't know how else to experiment with it, so I took it back down again. Day after day, I would try to do this until I was actually able to hold it in my lungs for quite some time. Because I didn't know if it was a pill that you took, or, what do I know? There's no information about this thing. But one day I was experimenting, one evening I was experimenting, and I had it in my lungs, and I forgot to breathe it out. And I went to sleep with the orb in my lungs, and had the strangest manifestation in the morning. I woke up with this energy burning inside of me, and I woke up going, yes, 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 bless you, bless you, bless you, bless you, yes, yes, yes. And if I tried to stop, it felt like I was going to explode with this. So I had to just keep, yes, 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 bless you, bless you, bless you. And it went on for over an hour until this started to dissipate. And I thought, this is crazy. This energy that's inside of here, yes, 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 and bless you, bless you, bless you. And didn't know what to do with it, but this was going to also come into play later on. Now, another thing that was interesting about the orb was I have an orb, my wife has an orb, one day I was out on the road and had some time off, and so I called my wife, and we're going to pray together over the phone. She's got her Bluetooth on, I've got my Bluetooth on. We're praying, and I told her, let's do an experiment. Let's hold our hands like this, and so that the orb would come into our hands. Because it almost seemed like you could, if you prayed, that the orb would carry the prayer. I don't know how, it's just kind of a weird sensation. So she's holding her orb, I'm holding my orb, and we're praying. And as we're praying along, I'm getting a weird energy sensation. So with my free hand, I took the pendulum and detected a morphic field that was going 4 feet away from my hand. Now, a morphic field forms around carbon-based objects of similar composition that are close in proximity but not touching. Now, the presence of a morphic field meant that her hand was basically on the other side of my orb. And that's how nature was picking it up, which said to me that the orb, her orb and my orb, there was no distance between them. At 1,000 miles apart, nature was detecting that our hands were 11 inches apart. And as we're praying along and I'm detecting this 4-foot morphic field, then she stopped praying and started talking about something, and the morphic field disappeared. I said, did you release your orb? She said, yeah, she just released it. I said, do me a favor and hold your hand out again and get the orb back into your hand. So she held out her hand again, and the orb came back into her hand, and suddenly the morphic field reappeared. And it was like, this is interesting, because this morphic field is outside of space. And here, when I was detecting the thorium, I think I mentioned that, I was getting the radon reading off the thorium that was going to be, the radon was going to be coming out over the next billion years, so I knew that energy field, that information field, was outside of time. Well, here I find out that this orb is outside of space. So the orb likes to go behind the shoulder blades. It is stimulated by positivity. Yes, 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 and bless you, bless you, bless you. And I've made a video about it. And the orb is outside of space.